And we're back. For joining us, thanks for joining the webinar today. Stop manually classifying your data. And we're going to show you how to use automation to add accuracy and security. This is a joint solution put together by Spirion, myself, and Seclore, and we're really excited to show you what the two tools together can do to remove some legacy thoughts and some legacy processes of the past. First, some housekeeping. If you are having trouble hearing or seeing the screen, first thing to do is make sure everything's plugged in properly. If that's not working, send us a chat. If we get a bunch of chats, we're going to know that it's something that we need to fix. We have technical people in the back that can fix that up and try to get everything back online. We have a demonstration that shows a lot of really cool features. It can be a little detailed. So if you're having trouble seeing the demonstration, look up in the top right of your screen, and that'll allow you to put the presentation in full screen mode. That'll get a little bit more detail and let you be able to see what's going on, specifically in the live demonstration part. We do have time at the end for questions, but by all means, enter your questions into the question panel you'll see on the right at any time, and we'll get to the ones that we're able to answer time permitting. And this webinar is being recorded. An on-demand replay is going to be posted in our customer portal, and it's going to be available on the Bright Talk channel. Here's the gang we're speaking with today. With me, we have Wally Biteau, the Vice President of Global Business Development at Seclore. Doing our demonstration today is Fonzie Vasquez, a solution engineer here at Spirion. And of course, myself, Product Marketing Manager at Spirion, to talk about the tools and processes that we have in place here. What we're going to talk about today is why we've been classifying data. Why is data classification still a thing? Why did it become a thing? How traditional classification efforts maybe aren't the best suited ways to be doing things moving forward with the way technology has advanced and threats have advanced. Manual classification, the requirements around what needs to be classified versus the reality of how this actually takes place. How using a solution like what we're going to show here with Spirion and Seclore can move your privacy and security strategy from a reactive position to a proactive position. Use cases that you can address with this joint solution. How the automation can drive purposeful classification. The data-centric security that Seclore delivers. Then we have a live demo, and we'll wrap it up with some Q&A. So as I said off the top, why do we classify data? And I'm going way back to the beginning there. You see that folder says top secret on it. That's essentially all we're doing here. Classification refers to the formal categorization and marking of material to indicate sensitivity. And all it's doing is it's providing an indication of to whom this information is available, and by way making it less likely to be made available to unauthorized individuals. And at its core, classification is nothing more than a simplified set of instructions to data handlers. And traditionally, those data handlers were humans walking around an office building with the top secret stamped on that folder. As we've moved forward, the data handlers become machines, humans working machines, other systems, and that's how data classification has evolved to what it is today. So as a concept, data classification is still more of a governance tool than a security tool, where it's more designed to provide these handling instructions to make sure the data goes where it's allowed. But as this technology has advanced and we moved to the computer age, classification moved beyond more visual markings. We were able to inject metadata into files, and that metadata allows classification guardrails to become actionable. We can use classification as the basis for rudimentary security. We can make it so files can't exist in certain folders. So certain files can't be emailed if they're a certain classification. We can use them to provide instructions to perimeter tools like a DLP or a CASB. And as these threats evolved and became more complex, data classification became more conflated with data protection. And because classification was what we had. It was the best tool that we had in the toolbox to indicate data sensitivity. It was the hammer that made everything out there look like a nail. But there's a flaw in that thinking. And the best way that I can describe that flaw is by talking about car seats. And trust me, hopefully we'll get there. This will make sense eventually. When we look at the first car seats that were for children in automobiles, their main purpose, if you look at that seat there, it's a little small in the corner there, but it doesn't look like a very safe device. Its entire purpose was containment. It was making sure that the child wasn't running all over the car and crawling all over the place. And that's very similar to what the very rudimentary initial thinking behind data classification was. When you think of that folder with the top secret stamped on it, it was just all about containment. It was just about indicating where these files and to whom these files were available to. No safety, no protection at all in there. As child seats evolved, started thinking a little bit more about safety. This one looks nice. It's got a nice padded seat. It's got some seat belts on there to keep things contained. And this goes back to the last slide I talked about, where we were able to inject classification metadata and intelligence behind this classification to make actionable policies. The guardrails around classification that started bringing in the concept of data safety and proper handling to these things. Then, as threats evolved, data classification, like I said, it got conflated with a certain level of protection. And that's not unlike, the extra padding that we're putting on this seat is not unlike the integrations that a lot of discovery and classification tools out there have, whether that be with a DLP or a CASB or an identity and access management tool. These integrations are adding extra levels of protection based on that classification, on the sensitivity of the data. But the flaw in all of these things, and the true story with the car seats, is that as safety increased with the cars, we got airbags, we got crumple zones, we got anti-lock brakes. The safety of the cars increased, and the actual engineers behind the car seats were not seeing the same returns on the safety of the child seats themselves, because each of these 3 car seats that I'm showing here were attached to a seat belt in the back seat of a car that was designed for a completely different purpose than keeping a small child-sized occupant safe. It was designed for something different. So what they did, and the parents out there on the line will probably recognize these little clips on the back that you fight with when you're trying to get your car seat in the back of the car, and it sticks and it never really works, and you have to swear a few times to make sure it works. But these little clips here in the mid-90s became the de facto way to attach a car seat to a car. It attached the seat actually directly to essentially the frame of the car, and cars had to be designed. And what that is, that represents to me the next generation in classification. By automating our classification efforts, we base the classifications on the objective sensitivity of the data. So by doing so, we make sure things are classified efficiently, consistently, and accurately. And by having that basis, we can make make everything else that follows upon that much more safer and that much more protected. So back, one last thing about the seatbelt situation is nobody's going to say we're not going to use car seats anymore. Nobody is trying to say that classification has lost its utility in data protection. But what we're saying here is that traditional classification, and that being manual, and a lot of tools out there are still relying on manual efforts, they're not built for the job of protecting in the 21st century. They lack accuracy. The determination of what is sensitive and what is not is very often outside the core competency of your average knowledge worker. Subjective. I could classify something as public, and Fonzie might think that's private, depending on our level of expertise and what department we happen to be in. Sometimes the classification can vary based on any kind of factor. What I say is public yesterday, I could say is confidential today, based on factors that have nothing to do with the objective sensitivity of that data. Manual classification often works by disrupting the user with ongoing pop-ups and dialogues. And on one case, the users often, they'll just click the button that gets them back to work the quickest. In another situation we see on the next bullet there, oftentimes what users can do is, out of an abundance of caution, they're going to overclassify that data and make it more restrictive than it needs to be, which reduces the business value of that data. And the users aren't doing this on purpose. They're doing what they're thinking is the right thing to do out of an abundance of safety, but actually removing business value from that data. And lastly, manual classification doesn't account for data's life cycle. What's confidential on day one might not be 30 days later or 60 days later. Think about files that are required for, merger and acquisition or a press release. Data changes and its sensitivity changes, even if the contents don't necessarily change. So that's why traditional classification doesn't work for what we're trying to do. And at that, I'm going to pass it on to Wally to talk a little bit more about the realities of this.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Jason, and hello, everybody. So yeah, I'd like to just talk about kind of the end result, right? Now that we have spent dollars on acquiring classification software, we've spent potentially months in determining how we're going to identify data and how we're going to react to the data. We've disrupted the user community potentially by training and providing them with additional requirements to make decisions. What's the ultimate end game? And really, what are three questions that we're hearing customers now ask themselves? And the first is, you kind of heard the hurdles that Jason went through. Is close good enough, right? I mean, we've done all of this, and is close really good enough? And the reason that they ask that question is because of the downstream activities, right? So my data handlers, now those could be users, those could be discovery tools. How are they going to react to this identification that might just be only good enough? And then finally, the third question is really as it relates to compliance. I've checked the compliance checkbox. I now know where my data is. I know where my sensitive data is, but is it safe? And what I've also done is really allowed others, hackers in this example, to understand where my sensitive data is. So I've done a great job of identifying it for everyone. And so ultimately, the question remains this is not a means to an end, right? My ultimate goal is to really ensure my data is safe, right? That's my ultimate goal. Everything prior to that were just steps for me to hit my end game. And so the question remains is, how do we really change the conversation? So when we're talking about classifying and monitoring, reporting and alerting, what we're really talking about is a reactive strategy to security, right? It's asking our customers to chase the data. It's asking our customers to chase the bad actors. And so the first step in the process is to talk about how do we change the conversation now with this best of breed offering, where we can drive it via automation, discover automatically, classify automatically based on business rules, protect the data, or something we like to coin as a verb, seclore it. And now once the data is protected, you are in complete control of the data. At any point in time, regardless of where the information is, you can modify or revoke privileges. And perhaps more importantly, you can track the data from a regulatory compliance. So any information that's protected is now auditable. And now I can understand how the information is being used in a business case. And so let's talk about some general business cases. And I'm taking the liberty of taking all verticals across all industries and kind of rolling them underneath these three buckets. The first is every customer of ours has a concern about data leakage. So a pretty basic use case where we have some amount of intellectual property, customer information, employee information, and the like, and we simply don't want it leaked out, whether that's accidental or malicious. So pretty simple use case. The second is a little more complex in that anymore you don't find yourselves performing your day-to-day business flows in the back office. You must work with external constituents. Here's some examples, but you need to collaborate externally just to get your daily tasks done. And with the COVID situation, our employees themselves are even no longer underneath our control and enterprise. So they also become almost external collaborators. And then the third is compliance. And really, I kind of call this alphabet soup, right? So depending on your industry, you have Big Brother who's ensuring you're paying attention to securing your information. So these are the use cases that together Spirion and Seclore address. And we see these three use cases across the board, regardless of industry. So I guess to start the journey, I'll flip it back to you, Jason, to talk about the first steps in the process.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Wally. And like I said earlier, it really does start with the accurate data discovery and that automation that's objective, and that's what I want to talk about right now. Like I said earlier, nobody is going to advocate for stopping using car seats in automobiles, and nobody here is advocating for stopping using classification. But what we are advocating for is what is that anchor? What is that thing that's gonna ground our classifications in reality? And that's something that we at Spirion we call privacy grade discovery. And what it's based upon is, an incredible breadth and depth. We pride ourselves in being able to find sensitive data types that others cannot, and we can find it in locations that others cannot. We say find anything, anywhere. Accuracy. Something that many discovery tools suffer from is concept of false positives. And on the surface, it's easy to say, okay, well, a false positive is manageable. Oftentimes, it's not manageable. The level of false positivity that's coming out of some solutions can really disrupt business flows and create annoyances for frontline workers that are creating dangerous workarounds. So having that accuracy that's built on our AnyFind technology, our proprietary technology, really is the way forward there. And velocity, we have our latest tool, sensitive data platform is one that's a SaaS delivered product, and it operates in the cloud. And if you're having a lot of data in the cloud, the advantage of having the discovery search and the data on the same infrastructure really does speed things up a lot and uses a lot more resource and a lot less resource intensive, and we're able to find things quickly. From there, this is where we get to the classification. We classify with purpose, and classify not only with purpose, but based on the objective sensitivity of that data. Dynamic classification labeling, that's what I referred to earlier. Data changes throughout its life cycle, and its sensitivity will too. Just because something is confidential today doesn't mean it's going to be 1 month, 3 months, a year down the road. So having the discovery agents of our tool being able to constantly monitor data or repeatedly monitor data to make sure that its sensitivity and its markings reflect what its actual sensitivity is very important. Persistent classification is where that classification is machine readable by other tools like a DLP or a CASB or a identity and access management. And having this all automated is of utmost importance, because as we've spoken about earlier, your average knowledge worker is not trained to be a data steward. They're trained and hired and paid for a set of core competencies that is outside data handling in many cases. So having this automated and out of the hands of the knowledge workers that are not designed to be doing this kind of work is very important. And by partnering with Seclore, we're able to add a level of remediation that really adds a level of granularity and control that Wally's going to talk about very shortly. It's called data-centric protection. You can manage the authorized actions, track unauthorized attempts on this data, and then have reporting that you're going to see that is really very powerful. And we tie this all together with the next slide I'm going to show you with something we call playbooks. And one of the things that we see or we hear surrounding automation is there's a certain amount of hesitation that surrounds automated processes because there's a thought that automation removes a level of control on the administrative side. But with the playbooks we have here, and you see a little screenshot there on the right, it's a very intuitive, very easy to use graphical user interface that works just like a regular flow chart with yes/no decision making, and you can trigger classification or protection and trigger Seclore protection at any step in that workflow, based on rules that you set and based on your corporate policies. Very easy, very intuitive, and without showing, Fonzie is going to show a little bit of a real playbook, but I have a very simplified use case that I can introduce how we can call upon Seclore to apply protection. And then before I hand it on to Wally to detail what that protection entails. Excuse me. So as we see here, very simple workflow, overly simplified, but for the purposes of a one-slide PowerPoint, I think it'll work. We're going to start and we're going to explore an endpoint. We're going to explore somebody's laptop, so to say, and we're searching for PII. We find a file that has personal identifiable information on it. If it doesn't, we're going to ignore that. We're not interested in that for this use case. But if there's PII in that file, what kind is it? Is it a social security number? If it is a social security number, we can set up a policy very easily that classifies that as internal. And furthermore, we can apply Seclore protection that limits access to these files with social security numbers to HR. Again, overly simplified example, but that's something we can do. So what if there isn't a social security number in there? We know there's PII in there, but it's not a social security number. What else could it be? Maybe it's a credit card. And if we do find credit card information there, well, we're going to classify that as restricted, and we're going to lock that down using a different Seclore policy all through the playbook and classify that as restricted and Seclore it, apply Seclore rights management to only the finance department. And this can be as granular and as complex as you want, but at some point, maybe you're going to find something that doesn't have a social security number or a credit card number. You know, we've detected PII, but what is it? And in this case, it's neither of the things that we've determined we have a policy for. But in this case, there's PII on it. We don't necessarily know what it is based on this workflow, but we can lock that down to just the user's machine using a Seclore self-protect, so to speak. So until such time that the user is able to identify that more appropriately. But the important thing is you've got a piece of PII there that is not at risk of leaving the organization and being tampered with or exfiltrated in any way, because we were able to apply the protection appropriately. So that's how we support calling on Seclore using automated workflows there. And I think I'm passing it back to Wally now to show what that Seclore protection actually entails.
Terrific. Thanks again. So yeah, let's talk about first what I like to coin the data-centric security lifecycle. And in my mind, this is kind of nirvana, right? We discover, classify, Seclore it or protect it, analyze it, and just repeat that process. And the beauty behind this is it's completely automated. So when we talk about Seclore it or protection, what we talk about are really answering 4 questions about your data. The first is who? Are you the right user or group of users who have access to this information? That's always step 1, is identity check. We need to make sure you are you. And once you pass muster, then we provide very granular controls around how you can now use that encrypted document, right? Can you just view it, edit it, print it, copy and paste, take screen shares, share it with others downstream, work offline? So just very granular controls. We also answer the question of when, so time-based. We have a time bombing capability. I'll go through an example of how this can be used in an M&A example, but we have time-based controls that can be down to a very specific date and time or month range, etc. And last but not least is location-based controls. And the great use case is compliance. You know, let's pick on GDPR. Perhaps the documents can be opened up in the EU, but not outside the EU. Right? So we can control the geo-fence around information. We could lock it down to a device. Maybe the board member downloaded or the CEO downloaded board member notes to their tablet, not thinking about security. If those board notes leave that tablet, they're not accessible by anybody anywhere else, right? So we can lock it down. We can also block mobility. Maybe you're concerned about mobile access, so we can block that. And all of this is very granular controls. And this is one half of what we talk about protection. So it's putting this policy and enforcement around your information. And then the second half of rights management is the auditability. So we have the ability to track everything that's happening to that protected information. This screenshot is showing both authorized activities, and the circled ones are unauthorized attempts. So not only did we block the action at the endpoint, but we also logged the event. And we can provide very granular forensic detail as to classification tags and the names of files, the locations, IP addresses, how long they've been on the file, etc., as well as trend analysis. So now you can get a bigger picture of what's happening with your information, again, more from a business sense than a SOC remediation sense. So here's an example. I mentioned the M&A scenario. And so what we have is a seller who's going to be sharing the financials to the buyer, potential buyer. And the first step in the process is Spirion discovering it, classifying and protecting the data. And so the very typical scenario is the seller is going to use some tools, some collaboration tools, Box, Office 365, maybe virtual data room, but upload it so that it can now be shared with the potential buyers. And the first thing that we've seen happening is the buyers immediately just download all the information so they have it in their hands, and then they share it with their team for the review process. So very typical M&A type of scenario. And now if that information somehow is leaked to someone else maliciously or accidentally, those individuals do not have access. And the beauty of this very simple flow is, as the seller, not only do I know that my information is protected, but I also can see what's happening to it. I can see the download and the access and the potential external individual who did not have access to it. And I can go even more finer grain by saying, you know, maybe I want to put a 30-day expiry or whatever the due diligence period is, and I want to make sure the data is only accessible within the US. So a perfect example of what we see real life activities. So I think we want to just get to the meat of this, and I guess I'll turn it over to Fonzie so we can actually see this in action. So Fonzie, over to you.
All right, thank you. Just to make sure, can you guys see the screen there?
We can.
All right, absolutely. So what I have for today for you guys is a video demonstration of Spirion SDP, Sensitive Data Platform, and how it integrates with Seclore to provide the data discovery, classification, and remediation with Seclore, as well as right management. So I'll kick off the video here. And before I do, I'd just like to explain that we are looking at the Spirion console, where we are describing a playbook similar to what you saw in some of the slides from Jason. So I'll go ahead and click play in there. And we're asking, again, you know, we're running a scan, and we're asking a very simple question: did you find PI data during the scan? If the answer is no, which is simply take no action. But if you did find PI data during the scan, let's go ahead and classify that data. Persistently, we will do that at the file level as well, and then we'll just classify as PII. Notice the automate option there. As Jason said, you know, automation doesn't have to be forced. You can enable or disable this at any time. And we will see this with Seclore once we come back later, how we invoke Seclore to protect those files. So we'll run a scan here real quick, and then we'll flip it over. We'll minimize the screen here, and then we'll look at the files getting classified by Spirion. So again, this process is automated. One of the things you'll be able to do, obviously, just to make sure, you can right click on top of the files, and it will show you which classification has been applied to them. So we can see the PI classification is there, and you can see also other classifications there as well. We're going back to the Spirion console now, and this time, again, maybe we didn't want to do this automated, but we'll walk through the playbook again just to make sure everything that has been taking place. So we ran the scan, we classify the documents, maybe we review the documents, and we say, okay, now is the time to Seclore those documents. So let's go ahead and do that, right? So we're calling Seclore now. We'll minimize this again, and we'll see the files now being protected or Seclore essentially. We'll just go ahead and open one of those files just to show you what it will look like. So once a Word document opens, you can see Seclore briefly flash the screen there. And notice the Seclore widget on the bottom right, right? So it tells us what kind of access are permitted for us within these files. And what we'll do is we'll essentially email those files to, let's say, an internal and an external user, just so that we can show and track and manage the experience, as those users interact with those files. So I'll wait for the video here to catch up real quick. All right, notice the smart sharing on widget from Seclore as well, and we'll just go ahead and click send there. And then we are going to look at the user behavior from both sides, right? So we're looking at the internal user here, which has received the email with the attachments, and we'll double click the essay document there, which is essentially just going to open. You'll notice that there's no user interaction, no prompts, no asking for a password, nothing like that. It's seamless. Seclore does integrate with Active Directory, and it's able to read which of those users essentially could have access to those files. We're looking at the user experience here, the internal user, and again, see the Seclore widget with read and edit access. So let's say you have a user which is trying to be smart and say, you know what, I want to copy and paste some of this information into a notepad and maybe take advantage of that. And as the user tries to do that, you'll see that it says very clear here, you're not authorized to copy this content. So please contact the owner, in which you may require additional permissions. This is the user with the public mailbox. And again, it's going to open the same document just to keep things equally here. And it's going to open in a browser. Seclore has its own online editor, so we'll see this here load very shortly. And notice the watermark that's going to show up in the document, right? It's going to have the email address from the sender saying that's the owner of the document. And again, the permissions, so read and edit permissions here. From here, we're going to switch back to the original sender of the email. And within Outlook, you can see that it has a track and manage option. So we'll go ahead and click on track there just to see what has been going on with those files, who tried to open the files, if we need to make any changes, or just basically giving us a quick overview of everything that's been going on with those files. So we'll click view more, and it's going to take us to the Seclore console here, where again, we can see all the activities regarding those specific files. Anything from date, time, open it, share. We can see the permissions here, the email ID of the owner. But there, you can go just a little bit step further, and let's say that one of those users needed to actually print the document, right? So if you wanted to change those permissions, you can see where it says up top on the right, view permissions, and it gives us the ability to say, okay, maybe I want to give that public user now the ability to print or to have full control, right? So that's a very short video demonstration of Spirion and Seclore providing, sensitive data discovery, classification, and remediation, as well as rights management. I'll stop there, and I'll pass it back to Wally and Jason.
Thanks, Hansi. And I think it has been a while since we practiced this, but I think it's still you, Wally. You're going to take us over by the outcomes we get from this joint workflow.
Yeah, I think what I wanted to do is just touch upon key takeaways. Hopefully these are some of the key takeaways that you guys have all gleaned from this session today. And I think the first and foremost is really kind of changing how traditional technologies like classification, discovery, DLP is being used in more of a reactive scenario. So really want to talk about the changing the conversation, right? That we can be proactive now, and we're being proactive because we're protecting data versus monitoring data. And the big deal on the monitoring situation is that because we're protecting it, you can now control it versus chase it. At any point in time, you could revoke the data as opposed to chasing your bad actors. And we can also take advantage of how the audit trail is now being used. We can now understand how my information is used in a business sense. Who's sharing it, who's touching it, how long are they on those documents, et cetera, versus the traditional, how is it being abused in a SOC remediation perspective. And we also have some very nice byproducts from this combined product set. One is we can actually accelerate the deployment. So a lot of the decisions as to what we should do, we can simply make protection the default, which means you have an accelerated time to value for these joint products. And ultimately, the reduction and or elimination of your SOC remediation requirements. So in this case, when you're protecting the data, well, you're not worried about alerts and reports and monitors and chasing the data and bad actors. So you get a really security with an ROI. So hopefully you glean that from that, and I'll flip it back to you, Jason, to take us home.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us, everybody, and thanks for that great demonstration.